All right. Well, let's talk just a little bit about tourism history in the Ozarks. And we begin, not surprisingly, with the part of the region that's closest to St. Louis, because the real money in Missouri for so many years was in St. Louis. In the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, St. Louis was one of the major metropolitan centers of the United States in general. It was a top 5 city in the country. The 20th century wasn't kind to St. Louis, and that it kind of fell behind a lot of other American cities. I don't think it's in the top 20 now in terms of population, but back in those days, lots of wealth, lots of affluence in St. Louis. And in the late 1800s, after the Civil War, you had St. Louisans who traveled down the railroad. Remember, we got the railroad built down to Pilot Knob on the eve of the Civil War, and the railroad was still there and eventually expanded after the Civil War. And they would drive down to the Arcadia, Ironton area, and that area, especially around Arcadia, developed into kind of a summer home cottage place for wealthy St. Louis people. There was an attempt in the late 1800s to kind of turn it into a sort of a Missouri, Saratoga, New York, a place where the wealthy would send their families in the summertime, and the men would go down on Friday evenings after work and spend the weekend and go back to work on Monday morning and that kind of stuff. And they were able to do that because of rail service and because of its proximity to St. Louis. It was a quick trip from there by rail down to these places. And hotels developed in this area, and you had the usual kind of outdoor activities for families. But the first thing that really impacted other places in the region was the healing water craze of the late 1800s. And this was a craze that not only affected the Ozarks, but affected lots of other places around the United States. Anywhere where you had these springs that had different kinds of minerals in them, or maybe kind of salty springs, and anything that was a little unusual that people could tout as healing springs, as healing water. We're talking about the late 1800s, an age when healthcare was certainly not nearly as advanced as it is today, and a lot of people got the idea that just by going and sitting in this spring water, you could heal certain things. You could heal. Many people thought you could heal just nearly anything by drinking it. You know, you could get healthier, and so you saw a lot of these. The first one in the Ozarks was, the first one to really boom in a big way in the Ozarks was Eureka Springs. And Eureka Springs is kind of neat in that it's still there, and it's still a major tourist destination. Most of these spring towns, these spa towns of the Ozarks, eventually disappeared. Many of them were built kind of out in the middle of nowhere just because somebody found a spring and started selling house sites, built a resort or a motel or something and brought people in. But Eureka Springs boomed in the late 1800s. You can see that its life really starts about 1879 after a local dignitary claimed to have been cured by one of these springs. And the town develops as a boom town right there, kind of a tent town, and then eventually into a real town with buildings and streets and all that kind of stuff, so that by the time the census taker came through in 1880, there were already about 3,000 people living in Eureka Springs. Some pictures from Eureka Springs. There's the Crescent Hotel, built in the late 1800s. I'm not sure what this building on the right is, but I put it up there because you can see this rock that it's partially built on. A lot of the money that built up Eureka Springs, a lot of it had connections to St. Louis, and a lot of it had connections to the Republican Party. And and there were political cliques that were involved there, and your usual money people. Eventually, the railroad was built to Eureka Springs so people could get from St. Louis and Kansas City to Eureka Springs. And that's when it really takes off, when you can get there by rail, and the wealthy start coming there.
What about Hot Springs? Is it developing at the same time?
Hot Springs really starts developing even earlier than Eureka Springs. Yeah, down in the Ouachita Mountains, Hot Springs, it predates Eureka Springs by many years. It only booms after the Civil War, but it had seen limited development before the Civil War. Yeah.
Is that Crescent Hotel the one that you see in all the pictures that's on the?
It's on the side of a hill where you can like you can go out to ground level on like 3 or 4 different floors or something.
Isn't it haunted, right? Or supposed to be?
Right. Yeah. I think they do haunted tours and stuff of the Crescent today. Yeah. Yeah. I've never stayed in it, but
well, I just mean
yeah.
the whole town. The whole town
Yeah. Yeah. Eureka is it is a unique place for the Ozarks. It's a place that I would consider not at all Ozarky. You know, there's nothing really sort of that says Ozarks about Eureka Springs except for the terrain. It's hilly and rocky, but other than that, the town has an identity of its own apart from the region's history.
Are the springs still there?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Bathhouses and stuff?
Yeah. I guess I'm not sure if. Not like in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where you still have like Bathhouse Row
They
down
drive
there.
over or something.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know. I've never taken the spring, the water or whatever you call it in Eureka Springs. Yeah. But it is a weird town. The streets, are just go everywhere because it's a place where no one in their right mind would have built a town in Eureka Springs had it not been for that spring water. I mean, that's the reason there was no town there in 1879, because it's hilly and rocky and so it develops into this weird sort of place. And we'll see later, Eureka Springs goes through many incarnations. In the early 1900s, it becomes kind of an artist, writer colony kind of place. And then it later becomes a place that attracts hippies and counterculture types, and then you get across to the Ozarks, and you get your kind of Christian theme park crowd. I mean, it's a unique place. Though I would say, if you've been to many just pure tourist towns in America, a lot of downtown Eureka Springs is going to remind you of pure tourist towns. With the sort of kind of hippie-themed stores and kind of new agey stuff that you see around there. You see that in a lot of especially mountain touristy places. Branson, not so much. It has it's got its own thing going on down there that's very different from Eureka. Yeah, Eureka Springs I guess they have annual rainbow pride parades, and they've got like they have I think there's a blues festival there every year, and they still have their old Ozark folk festival there, which has morphed into it's not just hillbilly music anymore. It is if you haven't been to Eureka Springs, visit Eureka Springs and just hang out a while. See what's there. Some more Eureka Springs pictures. The Hotel All Red. I don't know if that's there or not. I just found some of these pictures. But I like that one because it also had this thing here. Rooms with bath, $1. Rooms without bath, 50 cents or 75 cents. If you visit today, you're going to pay more than that. But and then I like this, European and American plan. And I don't really know exactly what that means. Someone suggested to me once that one of them probably means meals, and the other one probably means without meals. Yeah.
They got electric lights.
Yeah, electric lights. Yeah, I don't know what the date is. There's no date on that thing, but first class cafe connecting to lobby. So, pretty good stuff. Steam heated. And here's a map. This is just a few of the healing springs that developed into kind of resort towns in the late 1800s. And these things were everywhere around the Ozarks. You can see there, I mean, they're scattered around all over the place. And you can even see down in Christian County, I think this one may be O to V. I'm not sure which one. There are two dots here, and I don't know which dot goes with which town. One's named Reno and one's O to V. I think O to V was south of Ozark, so that may be that one. But these places, don't exist anymore. But for a time, for a decade or a few years, they boomed, and there was a hotel and people visiting and that kind of stuff. Just all over the place. And you could probably put 3 times that many on the map and still not have all of them. If you counted even the little rinky-dink ones where, they were just open for a year or two. It was really it was just part of the craze. It was another example of how in the Ozarks we often are tempted to view these things as kind of unique and look what happened to the Ozarks, but we were just really participating in a national, international craze that was sweeping Europe and the United States and Oklahoma. Yeah, you would just all over the place, wherever you had spring water, and
train had a lot to do with it too.
yeah, and in a lot of cases, see, not all of these little spring water towns had access to the railroad. And those usually dried up and died. Maybe not dried up literally, but they didn't survive. And sometimes the ones that did survive, like Eureka Springs, were the ones that had rail access. People could get there a lot easier in the days before automobiles. And some of these are still there, like Heber Springs. Today, that's still a touristy place because there's a lake that's built right next to Heber Springs. So Siloam Springs, that's still there. There's a college there. Yeah, El Dorado Springs. A lot of those, Climax Spring is still there. It's not a booming place, but I think the last time I was there, the roads in downtown Climax Springs were kind of half gravel, half pavement. I don't really know, but it's seen better days. But a lot of these places, we've never heard of, like Blankenship Spring, the Siloam Springs, Lithium Springs. The local people of the area would probably know, well, that was at so-and-so, but most of us have never heard of these places because they don't really exist anymore. The spring is probably still there, like Welch's Spring. It's still there, but there's no resort or anything.
Is that the one on either the current or?
Yeah.
Is that the one?
Welch's Cave.
Yeah, the TV.
Yeah, that's where
People came for the cure.
Right. Yeah, that was actually an early 20th century
They came in by wagon.
development.
I think.
Yeah. No, there wasn't railroad service there, or there wasn't always. There may have been during the lumber boom. There may have been like a branch of a railroad there, but yeah, that had a big operation in Shannon County.